My name is Sophia Mercer. I'm 31 years old. I'm an OR nurse at Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston, Texas, and I have been since I was 26. Straight out of my BSN program, first in my family to work in a Level 1 trauma center, first in my family to own property in the United States. That last part matters, because this story is about that property. I grew up in a working-class household in Pasadena, just southeast of Houston. My mother cleaned hotel rooms for 17 years. My father drove refrigerated freight across 3 states. They never owned a home. They rented the same 2-bedroom house on Ellsworth Street for most of my childhood, and every month when my mother wrote that check, I watched something quiet and tired move across her face. I promised myself at 14 years old that I would own something. Something with my name on it. Something no landlord could take. So when I met Daniel Mercer at a mutual friend's birthday in 2018, funny, steady, employed, kind, and when things got serious fast, and when he proposed in February 2019 at a small Italian place on Westheimer with a ring he'd saved 8 months for, I said yes with my whole chest. Not because of the ring. Because he felt like someone who understood what building something real actually meant. We bought the townhouse on Willow Bend Court 4 months after our wedding. $485,000. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. A small backyard with a fig tree the previous owner had planted. We put $62,000 down. $38,000 from my savings. $24,000 from Daniel's. Both our names on the mortgage. Both our names on the deed. I remember standing in that empty living room the day we got the keys, shoes squeaking on the hardwood, and thinking, this is it. This is the thing my mother never had. Daniel worked in logistics coordination for a regional distribution company. Good salary, stable hours, frequent travel. I worked rotating shifts at the hospital, sometimes days, sometimes nights, sometimes both back-to-back when we were short-staffed, which in a Level 1 trauma center in Houston meant almost always. We weren't rich. But we were building. Every month on time the mortgage was paid. Mostly from my account if I'm being honest, because Daniel's travel expenses ran high and my direct deposit was the reliable one. Handled my shifts. I handled the bills I knew about. I trusted Daniel with the rest because I was too exhausted most nights to do anything other than eat, shower, and sleep before the next rotation started. That trust was not an accident. It was engineered. What I didn't fully understand then, what I understand completely now, is that while I was trusting Daniel, someone else was working very hard on him. Quietly, patiently, over years. The way you work on something you intend to eventually own. Her name is Patricia Mercer. Daniel's mother. 61 years old. Lives 20 minutes from us in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Pearland that her late husband paid off before he died. She has 2 sons. Daniel, the younger one, and Ryan, the elder, the favorite, the one she has dedicated the last 30 years of her life to protecting from every consequence he has ever deserved. I want to be careful here. I don't want to paint Patricia as a cartoon villain, because she isn't one. She's actually quite charming when she wants to be. She called me sweetheart for 3 years. She brought casseroles when I worked long weeks. She remembered my coffee order. Oat milk, no sugar, and made a point of having it ready when we visited. But charm, I have learned, is just strategy wearing a warm coat. The first time I noticed something was off with Patricia, it was Thanksgiving, 2020. We were 8 months into the pandemic. Daniel's company had cut his travel budget, and money was tighter than usual for us. I had picked up extra shifts, 4 in a row, and contributed $3,200 to cover our November mortgage alone. We drove to Patricia's for dinner. She had the whole family there. Ryan, his girlfriend at the time, 2 aunts, a cousin. The table was set beautifully. And at some point during the meal, Patricia raised her glass and said, "I just want to say how proud I am of Ryan for keeping his business afloat this year. It takes a real man to hold things together when everything is falling apart." Ryan had a small landscaping business. It had received a $28,000 PPP loan that year, which I knew because Daniel had mentioned it. Government money. Not exactly a heroic act of financial resilience. Nobody mentioned that I had worked 86 hours that week in a hospital where 3 of my colleagues had already tested positive for COVID. Nobody mentioned the mortgage. Nobody mentioned my name at all actually, except Patricia. Once at the end of the night when she touched my arm and said, "Sophia, you're so strong, I don't know how you do it," in a tone that sounded like a compliment but landed like a dismissal. That was the pattern. Always. Ryan got credit. I got acknowledged for my endurance, which is a polite way of saying I was useful but not valued. The second incident was smaller but sharper. Christmas, 2021. Daniel and I gave Patricia a KitchenAid stand mixer she had been wanting. $449, cream-colored, the exact model she'd bookmarked on her phone and shown me in September. We saved for it. Wrapped it beautifully. She opened it, said, "Oh, how lovely," set it aside, and then spent the next 20 minutes reacting to Ryan's gift, a weekend trip to San Antonio he'd booked, with actual tears. She cried over Ryan's trip. She said, "Oh, how lovely," to ours. Daniel didn't notice. Or if he noticed, he filed it away in the same place he filed everything uncomfortable, somewhere deep and inaccessible. The third incident is the one that should have made me leave the table permanently. April 2022. Daniel and I had just refinanced our mortgage to lock in a better rate. Smart financial move, saved us $340 a month. I was proud of it. I mentioned it at a family dinner because Patricia had asked how things were going. She nodded. And then she turned to Ryan and said, "You know, Ryan, we should really look at putting that property in a proper trust. For the family. So it's protected." That was the moment I should have understood what family asset meant in Patricia's vocabulary. It meant Ryan's asset. And it meant my name was always going to be a temporary inconvenience on a document she intended to correct. I just didn't know she had already started correcting it. I need to tell you about the 6 months before I found out, because understanding the timing is understanding the crime. Between January and July of 2022, Daniel traveled more than usual. His company had restructured and his regional territory expanded. Memphis, Nashville, Little Rock, occasionally Atlanta. He was gone sometimes 3 weeks out of 4. I was on nights that entire stretch, which meant I was sleeping days, working nights, and existing in that particular exhaustion that or nurses on night rotation know well, where you stop tracking time in days and start tracking it in shifts. Patricia called Daniel more during this period. I noticed it in passing. His phone lighting up with her name while he was home on weekends. Him stepping outside to take the calls. I didn't think much of it. She was his mother. He was her son. I had enough to carry without auditing their relationship. What was actually happening during those calls, what I would learn much later, in a conference room with my attorney and a stack of notarized documents, was that Patricia had spent those 6 months working on Daniel. Methodically. She called it protecting the family. She framed my name on the deed as a liability. What if something happens between you two? What if she decides to leave? She could take half of everything. She fed him scenarios. She repeated them until they felt like common sense. And then she introduced the solution. A quitclaim deed, transferring my share of the property to Ryan. Temporarily, she told Daniel. Just until things were more stable. Temporarily. Daniel signed. He didn't tell me. I believe, and this costs me something to say, that he convinced himself it was minor. Technicality. Something he would fix later. Something that didn't really change anything. The notary's name was Gerald Foss. He was a friend of Patricia's from her church. He notarized the document with my signature already on it. A signature Patricia had traced from a photocopy of our original mortgage documents. Gerald Foss charged $75 for his services. $75 to commit felony fraud. The deed was filed with Harris County on March 14, 2022. Monday. I was in surgery that morning, a 7-hour spinal procedure that I scrubbed in on at 6 a.m. While I was standing in an operating room saving someone's spine, my mother-in-law was filing paperwork to erase me from my own home. I found out on a Tuesday in July. As I told you, 11:47 p.m., cold coffee, a tax detail I'd been meaning to check. And then 4 minutes and 17 seconds of absolute silence while the microwave clock ticked and something inside me became permanently, quietly, dangerously awake. I didn't confront Daniel that night. I went to bed. I lay there in the dark next to my husband, a man who had let this happen, and I breathed slowly and I thought. And in the morning before he woke up, I made one phone call. That call changed everything. And Patricia never saw it coming. I gave Daniel exactly one chance to tell me the truth on his own. That Saturday, we were at Patricia's for her usual Sunday dinner. She held them on Saturdays sometimes when Ryan's schedule conflicted. Pot roast, dinner rolls, sweet tea. Patricia in her floral apron, Ryan at the head of the table like he owned the place, which, legally at that moment, he actually did. I sat across from Daniel and I watched him. Really watched him. The way he avoided my eyes when Patricia spoke. The way he passed Ryan the bread before I even had a chance to reach for it. The way he laughed just a half-second too late at everything his mother said, like a man performing comfort he didn't actually feel. After dinner, driving home, I turned down the radio and said quietly, "Is there anything about the house you want to tell me?" He gripped the steering wheel. 3 seconds of silence. Then, "What do you mean?" "The house, Daniel. Willowbend Court. Is there anything you want to tell me?" He broke on the 4th second, pulled into a gas station on Alameda Road, put the car in park, and told me everything in one long, fractured confession that I sat through without a single interruption. Patricia had started the conversations in January. She had used the word protection 40 times if she used it once. She had told him I seemed unhappy, that she had a feeling things between us were headed somewhere difficult, and that he needed to think about the family's future. She had introduced Gerald Foss as a favor. She had handled all the paperwork herself and told Daniel it was temporary. 6 months, maybe 12, just while things settled. He had signed because he was tired and afraid, and because his mother had been the loudest voice in the room his entire life, and he hadn't yet learned how to turn down the volume. "She said it was protecting us," he kept repeating. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "She forged my signature, Daniel. That's not protection. That's a felony." He stared at me. I don't think the word felony had once entered his mind through this entire process. That told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly Patricia had managed his perception of what she'd done. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "I need you to not call your mother tonight." Then I looked back at the road ahead and said, "Take me home." He did. And that night, while he sat on the couch staring at the wall, I went to the bedroom, opened my laptop, and began building the case that would take Patricia's carefully constructed plan completely apart. What she didn't know was, she had left a trail. And I knew exactly how to follow it. Bro long send Cario R5 voila. 2:34 p.m. Chapter 5. The paper trail she left behind. The first thing I did was call attorney Rachel Voss. I had actually saved her number 8 months earlier. Not because I suspected anything, but because one of my colleagues at the hospital, a charge nurse named Donna, had gone through a messy divorce involving. And Rachel had won her case in 9 weeks flat. Donna had shown me the settlement paperwork in the break room one night between cases, and I remember thinking, I hope I never need this number. I saved it anyway. I called her at 7:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything in 11 minutes. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, and then she said, "Sophia, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not touch anything. Do not confront anyone beyond what you've already done. Do not post anything on social media. And get to my office today." I was in her conference room by 2 p.m., still in my post-night shift clothes, a travel coffee mug in my hand, every document I had been able to pull from the Harris County Appraisal District website printed and organized in a manila folder I'd labeled in my own handwriting. Rachel spread the documents across the table and put on her glasses. The first thing she flagged was the signature itself. Patricia had traced my signature from our original 2019 mortgage closing documents, which was actually the stupidest possible source to use, because mortgage signatures are notoriously careful and deliberate. People sign slowly at closings. They're nervous, they're excited, they're being watched by 3 different professionals. My signature on the quitclaim deed was too neat, too controlled. Mine in real life, the signature I use after a 10-hour shift when I'm countersigning medication orders and surgical logs, has a specific kind of fast, pressured slant to it that a traced copy from a mortgage document would never replicate. Rachel pointed to both signatures side by side and said, "A forensic document examiner will dismantle this in 20 minutes. The second thing she flagged was the date. March 14, 2022. A Monday morning. The deed had been notarized at 10:15 a.m. according to Gerald Foss's stamp. I pulled out my phone and opened the Memorial Hermann employee portal. I showed Rachel my time clock records for that day. I had badged into the hospital at 5:51 a.m. I had scrubbed into or Suite 7 at 6:14 a.m. I had a 7-hour spinal fusion case that didn't close until 1:38 p.m. My badge records, my surgical log, my anesthesia team's documented timeline, all of it placed me inside that operating room at 10:15 a.m. with my hands in a patient's spine. I was not at Gerald Foss's office. I was not anywhere near Gerald Foss's office. I could not have signed anything at 10:15 a.m. on March 14, 2022. Because I was performing surgery. Rachel looked at me over her glasses and said, "She picked the wrong day." The third thing Rachel found was Gerald Foss himself. She had encountered his name before, not in a good context. Gerald Foss had been the subject of a notary misconduct complaint filed with the Texas Secretary of State's office in 2019, involving a different family dispute in Brazoria County. The complaint had been investigated and closed with a formal warning. His license was still active, but his record was not clean, and a formal warning from the state is exactly the kind of prior history that makes a witness extremely uncomfortable under oath. Rachel made a note, circled his name twice, set that page aside. The fourth thing, and this is the detail that made me understand just how sloppy Patricia had been in her confidence, was the filing itself. When you file a deed transfer in Harris County, you pay a recording fee. That fee generates a receipt. That receipt has a name on it. Patricia had filed the deed herself in person, at the Harris County Clerk's office on March 14. Her name was on the filing receipt. Her handwriting was on the cover sheet. She had driven to the courthouse herself, handed the documents to the clerk herself, paid the $36 filing fee with her own debit card. Rachel set down her pen and looked at me across the conference room table. "Sophia," she said, "your mother-in-law committed a felony and then signed her name to it." I nodded. I took a sip of my cold coffee. "What do we file first?" I asked. Rachel smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. "Everything," she said. "We file everything at once." Within 48 hours, we had filed a civil lawsuit to void the fraudulent deed transfer and restore my name to the property. We had filed a lease pendens, a legal notice attached directly to the property record, which meant Ryan could not sell the townhouse, could not refinance it, could not use it as collateral for any loan, and could not do a single thing with it until the court resolved our case. We had filed a criminal complaint with the Harris County District Attorney's Office citing forgery, fraud, and notary misconduct. And Rachel had sent a formal preservation letter to Gerald Foss informing him that his records, his notary journal, and all communications related to the March 14 filing were subject to legal hold. I did all of this on a Thursday. By Friday evening, every legal mechanism was in motion. And Patricia had no idea. That Saturday, she called Daniel to confirm Sunday dinner. Pot roast again. She asked him to bring dinner rolls from the H-E-B on Highway 6. The good ones, the ones Ryan liked. Daniel looked at me across the kitchen. He nodded. We went to dinner. I sat across from Patricia in her floral apron, and I ate her pot roast, and I smiled when she called me sweetheart, and I helped clear the plates after the meal. She had no idea that 48 hours earlier, I had placed a legal freeze on her son's name and filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office against her personally. I have thought about that dinner many times since. About the particular kind of power that lives in silence. About how Patricia had spent months underestimating me, assuming that a woman who worked nights and trusted her husband was a woman who wasn't paying attention. She confused exhaustion with obliviousness. She confused trust with weakness. She had looked at me across her dinner table for 3 years and seen someone she could move around. A piece on a board she controlled. What she had never once considered was that I had spent 6 years working in operating rooms. Environments where a single moment of inattention kills someone. Where you learn to stay completely calm while everything around you demands panic. Where you develop a particular kind of focused, unshakable discipline that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need to. She had picked the wrong woman to underestimate. And now the clock was running. And I was the only one in that dining room who knew it. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because Patricia was about to make one more move. And it was the move that sealed her completely. Patricia made her final mistake 10 days after that Saturday dinner. She called Daniel on a Tuesday afternoon and told him, casually like she was discussing the weather, that Ryan was thinking about taking out a home equity line of credit against the Willowbend property. Maybe $80,000. Just to expand his landscaping business. She said it like it was already decided. Like it was already done. Daniel came to me that evening, pale-faced, standing in the kitchen doorway. He repeated what she'd said word for word. I think he expected me to react, to finally break, to cry, to scream, to do something that looked like the emotional response the situation had been begging for since July. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Rachel Voss. Rachel's response was 3 words. The lease pendens. The lease pendens we had filed 10 days earlier meant Ryan couldn't touch that property financially. Not a sale, not a refinance, not a home equity line. Any title company or lender doing basic due diligence would see that notice immediately and stop the transaction cold. Patricia had just revealed that she didn't know about the lease pendens. Which meant she didn't know about any of it. The civil lawsuit, the criminal complaint, none of it. She was still operating like she had already won. Rachel said, "Let her try. It'll only help us." So I said nothing. I let Patricia move forward with her plan. And 3 days later, Ryan walked into a title company on Westheimer Road to begin the home equity process, and was told that the property had an active legal hold and was currently the subject of litigation in Harris County Civil Court. Rachel told me later that the title officer had actually printed the lease pendens and handed it across the desk to Ryan in person. I would have paid money to see his face in that moment. Ryan called Daniel within the hour. Daniel called me. And I finally said the words I had been holding for 10 days. "Tell your mother to call her attorney. We filed 2 weeks ago." The silence on the other end of that call was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. Rachel scheduled depositions within the following 3 weeks. Gerald Foss was first. He arrived with a personal attorney. A detail that told us everything, because innocent notaries do not hire personal attorneys before depositions. Under oath, with his own prior misconduct record sitting in a folder on Rachel's desk and a criminal referral already filed with the DA, Gerald Foss lasted 40 minutes before he admitted he had notarized a document without the signatory present. He said Patricia had assured him it was a family matter, and that I had already verbally consented. He said he hadn't seen anything wrong with it at the time. Rachel placed my hospital badge records in front of him. My OR log. The surgical timeline. He looked at those documents for a long time. Then he said quietly, "I should not have done it." That was enough. Patricia's lawyers were expensive. But the truth was free. And it was already everywhere. The hearing lasted one morning. The forensic examiner confirmed the forgery in 12 minutes. Meyer Records did the rest. There was nothing left to argue. Patricia sat 3 rows back in a cream blazer, hands folded too tightly. The judge voided the transfer, restored my name, barred Ryan permanently, and ordered $67,000 in damages. She walked out without looking at me once. Her church community found out within the week. Courthouse records are public and small neighborhoods talk. Ryan's clients quietly disappeared. Patricia's phone stopped ringing the way it used to. No screaming match. No dramatic confrontation. Just consequences, arriving quietly and staying permanently.